curve made by these two cupcakes is a real-life example of a sine curve.
The way these bridges curve is a real-life example of a cosine graph. The lines that these music notes make are a real-life example of a tangent graph. This is what the parent graph of sine looks like. The amplitude is going to be 1 because the line goes down 1 and up 1 from the midline. The period of this whole graph is 2 pi, so that's the length it takes for one full cycle. The graph doesn't move to the left or right at all, so the phase shift is going to be 0. The midline is y equals 0, so the vertical translation is also going to be 0. The domain of this graph is going to be all real, so the graph continues in each direction for forever. The range of this graph is going to go from -1 to +1, because those are the highest and lowest points of the graph. And there aren't any asymptotes on this graph.
So this is the cosine parent graph. The amplitude of this graph is 1. This is because it goes up 1 and down 1. The period of this graph is 2 pi. This is because it takes 2 pi for it to go one full cycle. There's no phase shift for this graph because it does not move to the right or left, and there's no vertical translation because it does not go up or down. The domain for this graph is all reals, and the range is from -1 to +1, and there are no asymptotes with this graph.
So this is what the parent graph of y equals tangent of x looks like. The amplitude is going to be 1 because the midline graph goes up 1 and down 1. The period of this whole graph is going to be pi, so that's the distance between the two asymptotes. There isn't a phase shift in this graph because we start at the origin right here. There isn't a vertical translation either because the midline is at y equals 0. The domain of this graph is going to go from -pi/2 to +pi/2 because the graph is never going to touch the two asymptotes. The range is going to be all real, so it's going to continue in both directions forever. And the asymptotes are going to equal -pi/2 and +pi/2. These are the points where the graph never touches.
How to find the intervals on your x-axis. For your sine curve, you're going to take your period divided by 4. Same goes for your cosine curve. For your tangent curve, you're going to take your period divided by 2.
Let's figure out how you graph a sine graph. A of this value graph is going to be 3, which means our amplitude is going to go 3 up and 3 down from the midline. Our B value is 4. And to find our period, we take 2 pi divided by 4. So we will get pi/2. We don't have a C value, so we aren't going to have a phase shift, which means we're going to start at 0. Our D value is -3, which means our midline is going to go at -3. So we're going to start at 0 since there isn't a phase shift, and then for our next interval we will go up 3 from the midline, which takes us to 0. Our next interval we will go back down to the midline, and our next one we will go 3 down from the midline. And then for our final interval we are back at the midline. We will connect the dots, and we will finish our sine graph.
Alright, let's take a look at how to graph a cosine curve. First, what you need to do is identify your A, B, C, and D values. If we look at the equation, we can see that our A value is 2. This means that we are going to have an amplitude of 2. We can see that our B value is pi. To find the period, you take 2 pi divided by your B value, or pi, which means that we are going to end up with a period of 2. Our C value is also pi. To find your phase shift, you take C over B. So that means you would take pi over pi, and you would end up with 1. Our D value is 1, which means you will have a vertical translation of up 1. From our vertical translation, we can see that our midline is going to be at 1. Now we actually have to graph it. So the first thing you do is look at your phase shift, and that's where you start. This is on the x-axis. You go to your phase shift, and then you go up 2 from your midline. At your next interval, you're going to be on the midline. Your next interval is going to be 2 down from the midline. Your next one's going to be on the midline again. And the last one is 2 up from the midline. Then you just connect all the dots, and you're done. Okay, so let's learn how to graph a tangent curve. The first thing we are going to do is identify our A, B, C, and D values. We can see from the equation that our A value is going to be -3. Our B value is going to be 1. Our C value is going to be pi over 2. And our D value is going to be 0. Because the A value is -3, the amplitude is also going to be -3. The period is pi divided by 1, so that's just pi. The phase shift is C over B, so pi over 2 divided by 1, so pi over 2. And the vertical translation is 0. First, what we're going to do is identify our asymptotes. So, if we start at our phase shift of pi over 2, our first point is going to be half an interval. So then our asymptote is the next interval. Now we are going to plot our other point at up 3. And now connect the dots. You're done.